Thanks to those presenters. At this point, I'd like to ask all of the presenters to come up to the podium and have a seat at the table. We do have quite a bit of time for questions and answers from the audience, and I know a lot of people are likely to have additional questions, so we can have some further discussion. I will say, though, that this, just from the editorial standpoint, this has been a really outstanding session. I know we haven't even gotten to the Q&A discussion, but these have been very interesting presentations, and I've learned quite a bit over the last hour.
So a few things, if you could come to a microphone if you have a question. There's also a floating mic that they can bring to you if you can't reach one. A couple of points I wrote down during this talk I wanted to mention. The average length of time now, it used to be you'd go to join a practice, you'd be there for 10 years, maybe 20 years. The average length of time someone spends with their first job in general surgery is 2 years now. And that's because of dissatisfaction with job or contract or partners. So what was said earlier about getting to know them, getting to know your contract is incredibly important. The take care of yourself part of this is incredibly important. More than you'll ever know. And as to Raj's point, when he says check your AV, get up to the podium, make sure your video runs. Especially at Sages, make sure your video runs. All right, we have a question. Can you say who you are also?
Hi, I'm Candace Chipman. I'm currently an ACS fellow in New York for transition to practice, and then this summer I'll be starting a bariatric fellowship. So naturally, I'm going to be starting to look for a job this year, for next year after I'm done. How do you find a job in a city or naturally like a tri-state area that they're not necessarily advertising a job for through recruiters? How do you approach a hospital that you think they don't have your skill set? Your skill set will be something very valuable to them, but they're not advertising. And then how do you also use big wigs at your current job who may be trying to recruit you to stay there, but you don't want to stay there because you have other obligations to go to a different state? Thank you.
See, I'm writing down the questions because she asked 3.
So I'll try that. So I had a resident who very much wanted to go back to Florida, and she was training in Virginia. And oftentimes where you are, you tend to know the proximity of the jobs. The farther away from where you're training, the less you get to hear about these unadvertised jobs. So that's number one. So she wanted to go somewhere where I had no inside knowledge. And she told me about this as she was beginning her 4th year, and my advice was to her to start looking then. You need more of a lead-up time. Now, right now, if I want to recruit a partner, it takes somewhere between 6 months to a year and a half to get that person. It's actually fairly expensive for the institution. So, and the turnover we talk about kills us, because once somebody leaves, they give us 3 months notice, and it takes a year and a half to fill that, and I get to do the extra call. So it is a longer process than you might think. So if I wanted to go in a specific area, I'd start as early as possible. I would, first of all, ask around who has any contacts in the department, not just the bigwigs, but everybody who has contacts in that. Number 2, you can directly approach them. Find out if they're thinking of expanding, if they are somebody's retiring. Right now, for us to approve another position, it goes through several committees to justify it because it costs a lot of money. That institution may be in the process of looking for a bariatric surgeon, and they haven't advertised it yet because it hasn't gone far enough through the committee. So by all means, most of the big centers have a recruitment division that works with all of them. And if nothing else, they'll take your name, and you may hear about that later.
Asking never hurts. Cold calls never hurt. I know a friend of mine who was in residency. He found his job because he talked to the reps for a larger industry, I'm not going to say who, and had because they have a nationwide network of reps. They said, I want to work in this area. Could you talk to the reps there and ask their surgeons, hey, you guys looking to hire someone maybe in the future? And that's how they found a job.
I think
The rat's the last thing.
Go ahead.
Leave the boat.
No, I was going to say, I think a lot of it has to do also with what your situation is, how mobile you are, and what your geographic limitations are. So if you're geographically limited to one area, you have to be very aggressive in terms of just taking the initiative to cold call, to send emails with your cover letter. And some people won't respond, some people will, but you know what, that's okay, because a lot of these jobs don't know. And if you do it earlier, that's better, because they may not even know if they have a job or not, because the fiscal planning at some of these institutions happen a little bit later on. But if they have your name in the back of their mind, having your mentors and sponsors call people on your behalf is also helpful. So if you do get a bite and someone comes back to you, get somebody that you like, who knows you well, if they have a relationship with that person, to call them to solidify that interaction. Even if they want to recruit you at your institution, in my heart, I believe your mentors and sponsors are going to want you to do well. And they will call on your behalf, and they might say, we want to keep her, but that only makes you more desirable. And I can tell you personally, when I was coming out of fellowship, it was a rough year for jobs, and I had to be around New York City. Like, I had to, because that's where my husband's job was. And I was sending out resumes and cover letters and having people call on my behalf. And it worked. I got a wonderful job, and it was great. But it was really stressful, because I'm like, this is not going to work out. There's no jobs out here, and I need to be here. The other thing it did is it created relationships for me. So Ken Murayama, I don't know if you guys know who he was. He was at Penn for a while, and he was in Hawaii. I sent him a cover letter, and I sent him my resume, and he wrote me back the most lovely rejection letter that you could ever have. How wonderful, and how I seemed like a great candidate, but they didn't have a spot, but it was just so lovely. And that created a bond, and he's my friend to this day, because we kept running into each other through SAGES, through different hernia mechanisms, and he's still somebody who's now a friend, a mentor, or a collaborator with me. So just do it, and follow up on those relationships, and have people call for you. All things work out in the end.
In your situation, you said they may not be recruiting, but first thing you do is you go look at the job boards. American College of Surgeons, SAGES, there's several of them out there. Go look at the job boards, go see what's out there. And they're updated, I think, weekly. So that's the first place to look.
Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is James Taggart. I'm from Lenox Hill Hospital. Thank you for the excellent presentations. And actually, being in the job search, I'm a fellow, and graduating in June, I can reiterate what you're saying. I had a very specific area that I want to be in, and I called, and that's how I got my current contract. So my question is, with this contract that I have, there's a number of clauses that I would like to change. They're not even, it's not financially related, but how do you go about negotiating with a surgeon who's much more senior than yourself, in a respectful manner?
Do you want to hit that, Charles?
So my first contract really sucked, and I realized that about 6 months into it. And,
Amen.
And I came to them and said, and I knew the numbers. I knew what I was bringing in. I knew what I was costing them, and I could explain to them why it wasn't fair. And I had a logical sort of explanation to what I wanted to do. In the same group, after a couple of years, I realized there was another thing I wanted to change, which I really didn't like, the call schedule. Or the senior surgeon wanted to do less call, but wanted to make just as much money. And I explained to him that couldn't be a fair way, but I suggested a way that we valued call, and call would be paid, and rewrote the contract again. So part of it's preparation. I think the non-financial things are usually the easiest sometimes to negotiate around, and some of them you won't find any movement. But if they value you, you've done a good job. If you understand what the contract is and what you want to change, and you have a rational reason for that. I don't want the non-compete. And if that's, by the way, what items broadly are they?
So it's for a private practice, and non-compete is one of them. The other aspect is I face a penalty if I leave within 1 year, which I wouldn't do anyway. There's an arbitration clause at the end, which I found interesting, where I basically, if there is some sort of lawsuit, it's kind of an extrajudicial, like, moderator kind of. So those are some of the few things. There's a couple others, but it's things like that. Yeah.
So you have to come up with something that's fair for them. They've invested in money. They probably will lose money if you were to do that. Come up with a repayment plan that would work for them. Now, it's harder for a private group, and it's easier if you sign a contract with a hospital and you say, look, I don't want to work for you, I want to work for this private group, but I'm going to still come to your hospital, do all my cases there. Actually, that's not a big deal for them, outlining what your intentions and putting into words, even though I will leave your employ, I'm going into private practice, I'll continue to do my cases here, and I will pay back the money that you advanced me over so many years. A little harder for private practice because they brought you in, they've taken the, and if you leave them, you're going to compete with them. So that one's going to be a harder one, and you signed it knowing that if you, and the other thing is, how far away do you want to move? And start over again.
All right. Raj, did you have a comment?
I just want to add, in terms of what you said, it's important to look at the stuff you don't like, but it's also important to look at the stuff that's not there. All right, so consider the stuff that's actually not in the contract. So when I negotiated my last job, there wasn't anything about moving expenses. There wasn't anything about kind of leadership training. And so I asked for those things. And then I moved to Montreal, and I was like, okay, so I'm going to need to take French lessons, and I'm not going to have time just to go to class, so I need a personal tutor. And I was just going to pay for that myself. And then my wife just said, why don't you ask them to pay for it? And so I did, and they were like, yeah, that's no problem, we'll pay for that. So there's other stuff, and don't give, not the specifics, but there's probably stuff that you can ask for, and they probably haven't even thought about it. And they'll be like, yeah, okay.
That's a good point, and sometimes how you spin it is, I want this because this is going to make me want to stay. And why do I want you say? A lot of times I've seen the contracts, they start out with there's a year contract or 2-year contract, and there is no long-term vision here. And they usually say, well, we'll see, we'll make it up. They say, and what you say is, no, I want to come here and I want to be here for 10 years. So I want to see the contract that's going to get me from year 3 on. And you can spin that in different ways. That's telling your employer, I really want to be here. You need, and they. The other interesting thing about contracts is, having read a number of them, some of them are really poorly written from their standpoint. It doesn't protect them. They haven't done this before, and you can usually tell when they've written their first contract, there are all kinds of things missing. And if you understand this, then you can actually fill in the details to your advantage.
So one other thing on what Charles just said, it's not only this will keep me here, this will make me more valuable to this institution in practice. That's another way to approach that, the French lessons. That will make him more valuable because you'll be able to communicate, not need an interpreter in clinic.
I just want to have a word of caution, though, because how you, and I understand why you're asking this question, because how you set this up sets the tone for your start. So a lot of these contract negotiations are a dance. You want a little, they want a little. No one should be comfortable at the end of a contract negotiation, but you should both walk away a little bit
disappointed.
A little disappointed, but a little happy. If you come in and strong arm, they might yield because you might be of value and they might need you, but that also starts you at kind of a different playing field with a different lens that they're looking at you when you start. If you come in very meekly, then you might be disappointed. So when I tell people to look at their contracts, I tell them, how much do you want this job? How much do you like this job? How much value do you bring? And please don't take this offensively, but your first year out, none of us have any value, right? Because we have no proven track record or anything. So the contract you negotiate year 1 is not the one after you've been out a few years and you have data to show around it. And will these clauses impede you from doing your job, and why are you fearful of them? And if it's something that's a deal breaker, then you go out hard. If you say, listen, this arbitration thing, but when you approach them, tell them exactly why is it worrisome to you? What are you worried about is going to come out from there? If it's a non-compete clause, you can say, well, what if something happens and this is the area that I have to be in? And you also have to look at the laws for non-compete, because a lot of times we sign non-compete clause, but a lot of states they're illegal. They don't even exist.
Right.
So I would have the language looked at, because you might be fighting a battle that it doesn't matter, because if it came down to it, it wouldn't hold up in court and you could go anywhere anyway. So you wasted your energy and you threw a card when you didn't have to do it.
Yeah.
So just be thoughtful about it. And at the end of the day, just how valuable are you and how much do you want the job, and before you pick the battles that you want to go into.
Many states have, and I learned this doing the transition to practice manual that we did, many states have restriction of trade clauses in their laws that make the non-competes illegal. They can't enforce them.
Unfortunately, in this area, I think it is enforceable.
Oh, okay, because I was about to say you might fight a battle you've already won.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're gonna move on if
you.
that's okay.
No problem.
More questions.
Hi there, Luke Gagan, medical student in Imperial College London. I think my questions are mostly directed to Raj. Would you mind sharing your own personal experiences to kind of transitioning across the pond? And more open to the rest of the panel, how common is it for sort of like foreign medical graduates to apply at later stages of the career? Because to my understanding, the residency applications for foreign medical graduates is a bit of a minefield. So yeah, just drawing on your experiences.
Okay. We probably need to have a long chat over a few years because I moved from England to the US, and now I've moved from the US to Canada and French Canada as well. So, in a nutshell, there are ups and downs. There are differences. I mean, I'm not really answering your question. In terms of what we're talking about here specifically, negotiation, it's much more clear-cut in North America. I mean, at Imperial, when I got my job, Lord Darcy said, "Raj, you're staying." I was like, "Good, thanks." That was it. All right. So there wasn't really much contract negotiation there. There's another question.
So, as in broadly to the rest of the panel, because from my perspective as sort of like a foreigner, I feel as though a bit underpegged in terms of, we just talked about negotiation and having sort
Correct.
of leverage. And coming in with obviously no proven track record in this country whatsoever, how common is it to sort of negotiate in that aspect?
So your leverage comes with your skill set.
Right.
Your leverage comes with the things you're bringing that they don't have.
Sure.
That's your leverage. And the younger partners tend to work harder. And some of the senior partners, as I said, may not want to take call, may want to cut back on their volume a little bit, spend more time with their families, achieve that equation a little more. That's your leverage.
Sure.
And I would look at, in the first job you take, look at the way you're compensated. Is it just a flat salary you're making with no added, if you develop above a floor, are you going to get compensated for that extra hard work you're doing or not? Because I think that even if they undervalue with your base on salary, but you're going to be paid on your production, you're going to prove your value pretty quickly.
Create
and
a
that'll
tier
help.
system of
Yeah.
reimbursement. Now, one thing I want to add that's off of subject, you hear a lot about RVUs, and a lot of us are judged on our RVU, our work value unit that we create. You are more than an RVU when you go out there, okay? You generate a lot more money for a hospital system than just what you do in the OR. You order CTs, you refer patients, you order swallow studies, things like that. So don't let, in your first contract maybe, but as you get out a little more, don't let RVUs be the determiner of where your salary is. You can ask your administrators, I want to see the full input of my contribution to the hospital, not the OR, everything I order. And if they don't give that to you, then they're hiding stuff from you. All right,
They probably know it. They probably know it.
oh no, oh God, they know it. Yes. No, they know it. They know where every, like Starbucks, they know where every bean goes, I promise. All right, any other questions? Okay.
Hello, I'm Srikanth from Philadelphia. I'm towards the end of the chief year right now, going for fellowship next year, and I'm trying to look for jobs from now onwards. So we get, as everybody, all the residents will get a number of emails about the recruiting companies and finding jobs. So I want to ask the panel, what's the best way, to find jobs? And the next question is, being a foreign grad, we have visa restrictions too. And so how we have to play while negotiating the contract with visa?
So I can speak to the first point. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything for finding jobs. The job boards are great, especially if you're in a subspecialty after you're doing a fellowship. Recruiters tend to be used, national recruiting services tend to be used for jobs that are harder to fill, usually in more rural areas. So they will pay you more to be that guy. You'll be the guy. 24/7, maybe. You'll be the guy. And then when you want to take vacations, they have to hire someone locums to come in and cover your service, cover your hospital to let you go on vacation. That takes a lot of planning beforehand. So recruiting service you're getting the email from, and they are valuable too. We have one of the recruiters actually wrote interview tips in the transition to practice manual because they coach people on interviewing and things like that. So Charles, you have something?
Recruiters are a mixed bag. So the small town jobs that you see, the really high salaries, I did that for 6 years. From a surgical standpoint, it was very fulfilling. I was very broad-based. I was a true value to my community. I just couldn't live there. My family couldn't live there. So to me, it's not, once again, the salaries will look great. And if you would be happy in that small town, by all means, listen to them because they'll find you a lot of jobs that truly you are needed, you will be respected, you will be an integral member of that community. But will you feel comfortable living in that town?
And are the schools good? And are the amenities good enough for you? As for the visa issues, I don't have any experience with that. I apologize. I don't know if anyone on the panel does. but we will add that next year. All right. Oh, this joker has a question. I'm kidding. Go on.
No, can I add if I can add a comment about recruiters? So if I'm Alan Harsman, the program director at Ohio State. The recruiters are like real estate agents, right? So most of those ads you get, they're working for that place that's hiring. They're like the person selling the house. Probably your best bet is to have your own agent, right? Just like your best bet to buy a house is to have your own buyer's agent, and they're going to split the fee somehow. So that's one of the things I was warned about, is you probably don't want to give your CV to everybody that sends you an email, because they're going to send it to a whole bunch of people, and then in some place you might really want to work is going to get your CV from 5 different recruiters and wonder what's going on. So if you really want to work with a recruiter, you might be better off hiring your own in some sort of arrangement.
Thank you, Alan.
If there's no other question, I've got a question.
All right.
So I have a question I'd like to ask the panel if there's no one else. So we're talking about kind of recruitment, and mentioned it can take a year and a half, and I've gone through this a couple of times as well. I think the question I'd like to ask the panel is, how does that impact on your work-life balance? Because it's pretty stressful, and it's stressful for your family, and your kids are going to be moving school and so forth. And how do you get through that process from a family perspective?
I'll start. My first job lasted 2 years. It didn't work out. We had to move. We pulled up I came from residency, did a 1-year fellowship, pulled up roots, did that, went 2 years down to another place, did 2 years there, then came back to where I did my fellowship at Ohio State. It is difficult. Luckily, my kids were younger. I have more kids. I have 5, more than anyone here, probably. I have 1 going to college, 1 in diapers, which is a mistake. I will freely admit that. As a surgeon, you'd think I would plan better about that, but my wife got her girl, so she's happy. Work-life equation. It is difficult. It is difficult pulling them out of school. I was looking for, I'll freely admit this, I was looking for a job I was entertaining another position next year because my oldest is going to college. He finishes high school. I have twins. They will be going to 8th grade, so they would have had a good transition year in a new school going to another high school. So I won't be looking for another job. Is Alan still here? Earmuffs. I won't be looking for another job for 5 years, because that's when my what? Thanks. I will not entertain another job offer, which is what came to me, for another 5 years, because that's when my twins finish high school. I promised them they would finish where they start high school. I don't want to do that to them. So that's part of it. It's difficult. It's timing, and it's a lot of talk back and forth with your family.
I think some of it's being very thoughtful in that first job you take. We talked about all the things you look at, the different factors you look at, and salary is just only part of it. But is it somewhere you see yourself long term? Mm-hmm. Because it costs you a lot, emotionally, and your family, everything to keep moving. So it's something that has to be factored in. And if you're on good rapport and say you're going to leave your group on good standing and join a group, sometimes most people will be sensitive to that and say, well, let's have you start in a year when the timings, work for that. That's something you can also think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember that as being a very painful year. So I was 6 years in practice. I was pretty much ready to go. Had a busy practice, and I got to a place that really didn't know how to introduce me. So once again, one of the reasons I'm passionate about this is I've felt like I've made mistakes. I don't really need other people to do it. So they need to, if you're a surgeon who is ready to go, you are a productive one, you are gone through the learning process, you need to have them know that, and you need some guarantees about that, because you can bring a very valuable skill set. They may not appreciate that. In terms of kids, mine were going from first to second. I also had twins. Actually, it was easy to sell it to them, because it was actually for them, because really the final nail in the coffin for me is once my kids hit school, I realized we couldn't be in the town that I was at. So they were very excited about it. But younger kids are easier. One of my residents that we were trying to recruit back, and her daughter is getting to the point where she needs to make the move now rather than in 4 years from now, because the daughter's not going to want to move there. So I think part of when you make your career moves, depending on your kids' ages, and thinking about that, there are times that you probably shouldn't move. You should probably just stick it out for another couple of years.
So I'm probably somebody else not to learn from. It's hard, and it's hard to make those decisions, and a lot of it, everything in life is a balance and a scale, right? So how good is the opportunity, where are your kids in school, and where does that all kind of fit in and play in, and you have to weigh that. The one gem of advice that I'll give everybody is have a supportive partner or spouse. And if you have support at home, then you can make it through anything and make anything work. If the person that you live with is angry at you or you don't have that support, it's not going to turn out well no matter when you leave with your kids. So choosing the right partner to share your life with is a really big deal. I have the most supportive husband in the entire world. Probably very few people know, I got the dream job opportunity of my life at University of Michigan, somewhere I've always wanted to work, very aligned with what I want. My husband is a very successful person in the music industry in New York City. So who wins? And what we're doing right now is I have my 2.5-year-old. I'm sort of a single mom Monday through Thursday. He's working in the city 4 days a week. He flies home every single weekend, Thursday night, and goes to Monday morning. It has its pluses and minuses, but we both made it work, and we made it work for us. And is it sustainable? I don't know. I'll let you guys know next year when I see you. But we're not going to get divorced. I just don't know what the living arrangements will be. And I'm not leaving Michigan, so we'll see what happens with him. So those lines are in the sand. So we'll see what he decides to do. But at the same time, we can only do that because I have the most supportive partner in the entire world who's willing to share our dreams together and make it about us. So the long-winded way is don't discount the people in your life, the decision makers, the decision partners. Have them have a say. Choose people who are going to support you, because then when you do go through those rough times and you have to move your kid at a bad time, because sometimes it happens, you're a unified front and they're not feeling contention and anger with you, and that will help get them through it when it's difficult.
And keep them in the loop. If you're thinking about making a change or something like that, keep them in the loop, let them know. All right, we have time for one more question.
Question. What are everybody's views, the men and the lone female, on maternity leave? And how do you negotiate when you're going to start that, particularly if you don't have children and you're going to be going into a new job? And I want everybody's opinion too, because, we, as women, we talk to the other women, but the reality is we're not the majority on our jobs, and the male opinions do matter too.
I'll start. My partner's pregnant right now. She's going to take 3 months off.
You're on kid 6 now?
No, one of my surgery partners.
I'm sorry.
So
No, urology took care of that for me. Thanks. She's going to take 3 months out. That's it, because I work at a state institution. That's the state guideline, so it's a little different for us. So I'm going to let you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
deferring that to me. But anyway, so I'm a firm believer in maternity and paternity leave. I think it's terrible in this country that we only value the female partner. I think there's a lot of men that want to take time off. And so all of you going out and negotiating that contract, be pioneers. Talk about paternity leave. Do that. You are entitled to be with your children the same way I'm entitled to be with my child. And it varies. I've heard 6 to 12 weeks. I had 6 weeks off, which ended up at 8 weeks because I had my baby 2 weeks early, which I thought was too short, but that's what was negotiated for me. Now, some of that has nothing to do with your ability to negotiate. At some institutions, you have to be there a certain amount of time to vest before the FMLA will kick in and you'll get paid. At Michigan, for instance, you need to be there 2 years before you're able to qualify, and that's something I just found out that we're talking about and working on. But there are some places that you have to have bought into the system for a certain amount of time before you qualify for things. So you really want to look into the rules around that, around FMLA, and then have that conversation, especially if there's no precedent that was set before that, and come with data and how you're gonna do it. Because it's not just the maternity leave. What if you get sick at the end of your pregnancy? What if you're on bed rest, right? You're a human, you're growing another human. That should be the most important thing. And if you're in the right place with good sponsors and mentors, you'll make it work.
I think that's an important discussion to have early on, because it'll be very revealing as to the priorities of the partners that you're going to be joining. If it's something they value and they value it, they'll support you in it. If it's something they don't value, you'll know that right away, and it's probably a good idea to know that before you take that job rather than finding out, later on.
So as a program director, one of my chief residents will deliver on May 20th, and if any of you have been getting close to graduating, the number of weeks you have to do over the last 2 years is pretty set in stone. And so we've been dancing around that. Half of my residents are women. We've had people have babies during the pregnancy or during the residency several times. I think women bring a unique aspect to general surgery that I'm all in favor of supporting. From my advice to you is to go to a larger institution because they do have rules like this, usually based on that affect all employees and not just physicians. And that's how, in our institution, you'd be protected with, I think you would get 3 months maternity leave. I don't know if there's a vesting period in my particular institution.
I don't know if we have that
The
either.
other thing I would say is it becomes a lot easier to accommodate a partner being out for 3 months if you've got 6 people rather than having 2 people or 10 people. So when we had one person retire and one person leave from the trauma critical care division, they went from 6 to 4. The general surgeons pitched in. That worked a lot better. If it truly had been 4 down to 2, that's just unworkable for the people that are left. So if I were you, I would look, if I go to somewhere and then I'm not there, could they sustain that? Have they sustained that before with partners leaving? By the way, partners do leave, and it becomes the same thing. They're out usually longer than 3 months. So in a larger group, that I think it's very supportable.
All right.
From a paternity leave perspective, I took 2 weeks when my son was born and 2 weeks when my daughter was born. That was in England and in Canada. We didn't have kids when we were in the US. But when I had a resident in the US and she took 4 weeks off to deliver a child, I just thought that was crazy. I thought it was ridiculous. Okay, so I think 3 months, and it's what sounds right for you, but it reminds me of something my wife tells me. She's like, when you're older and you've done all this great stuff, you're not going to say, God, I wished I did another operation, or I wished I'd published another paper. You're going to say, I wished I'd spent more time with my family.
Amen. All right, well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Please don't forget there's lunch in the exhibit hall as well. And thank you all my panel members.